The Orion Prime space station hung like a steel spider in the void, its 8 massive docking arms jutting out from a central hub that glowed with the amber lights of 1,000 windows. Situated at the edge of explored space, it served as the last bastion of civilization before the untamed frontier, a melting pot where species from across the galaxy traded good stories and secrets. Captain Zara Kale stepped off the transport shuttle, her slender form and iridescent blue-scaled skin drawing curious glances from the station's diverse inhabitants. As a Zanari, she possessed an elegant, almost feline grace, with large violet eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The emblem of the alien alliance, a spiral of stars embracing a central sphere, gleamed on her shoulder, marking her as a xenobiologist of considerable standing. She checked her communication device, reviewing her mission parameters. The Remora star system had recently reported unusual ecological disturbances, and as the Alliance's leading expert on adaptive biology, Zara had been dispatched to investigate. But that was the official reason. Her true assignment, known only to her and the High Council, involved a much more sensitive matter: humans. The bipedal mammals from Earth had spread across the stars in the last century, adapting to environments that should have killed them, surviving conditions that would cripple most species. And they had done so without the genetic engineering that other races required to colonize hostile worlds. The Alliance was concerned, to say the least. Zara made her way through the crowded central concourse, her sensitive ears picking up fragments of a dozen different languages. The station smelled of recycled air, unfamiliar cuisine, and the distinct musk of too many species crowded into too small a space. But beneath it all was the metallic tang of industrial cleaners, the universal scent of trying to make something old seem new again. A notification flashed across her device. Specimen processing level 7, sector 23. Authorized personnel only. This was what she had come for. The security checkpoint to level 7 was manned by a bored-looking Craxian, whose 4 arms moved independently as he checked credentials, adjusted monitors, and scratched at one of his horns simultaneously. He barely glanced at Zara's Alliance credentials before waving her through. "Dr. Kale," he grunted, the translator embedded in his throat, struggling with the softer consonants of galactic standard. "They're expecting you. Follow the red line." The hallways beyond were sterile and bright, devoid of the chaotic energy that filled the public spaces. Zara followed the glowing red path embedded in the floor until she reached a viewing gallery overlooking a processing chamber. Several Alliance officials were already there, watching intently through the one-way observation glass. Below, in a chamber reinforced with energy barriers and metal plating, stood a single human male. He was tall by human standards, perhaps 1.9 meters, with dark hair cropped close to his skull, and skin the color of the earth and clay found on desert worlds. His body was lean but muscular, covered only by a simple utility suit that did little to hide his physique. A network of old scars crisscrossed his exposed forearms. "That's Wyatt Cross," said a voice beside her. Dr. Lyrax, the station's chief medical officer, had appeared at her elbow. The Talaxian's translucent skin pulsed with green bioluminescence, a sign of excitement in his species. "Former Earth Special Forces, now a mercenary for hire. He's agreed to help us with our problem." "What problem requires a human mercenary?" Zara asked, though she already knew the answer. As if in response, a heavy door on the far side of the chamber slid open with a hydraulic hiss. From the darkness beyond emerged a nightmare. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, its hunched muscular form covered in segments of natural armor plating. 6 limbs ended in articulated claws that looked capable of shearing through starship hull plating, while a crested head housed rows of serrated teeth and 4 compound eyes that gleamed with predatory intelligence. Its segmented tail, tipped with a venomous barb, lashed back and forth in agitation. Razor Claw. Zara breathed, recognizing the apex predator from xenobiological records. Native to the outer moons of the Remora system, these creatures were living weapons evolved to hunt in environments so hostile they were considered uninhabitable by civilized species. We captured it after it killed 3 security teams on Remora 4, Dr. Lyrax explained. It's responsible for the destruction of 2 mining outposts. We need to understand its biology, find weaknesses, but none of our automated systems can penetrate its armor. Down in the chamber, Wyatt Cross showed no reaction to the monster that now shared his space. He stood perfectly still, watching the creature with a detached curiosity that bordered on boredom. The razor claw, for its part, seemed to be assessing the human, its head tilting from side to side in a disturbingly intelligent manner. "What is he going to do?" Zara asked, a sense of unease growing within her. "Surely one human can't—" The razor claw moved with explosive speed, lunging across the chamber with its front claws extended. The attack was so swift that Zara barely registered it had happened before it was over. Yet somehow, Wyatt was no longer where he had been standing. He had sidestepped the charge with seemingly impossible reflexes, pivoting on one foot to position himself alongside the creature's flank. Before the razor claw could reorient itself, Wyatt's hand shot out, grasping one of the creature's secondary limbs. What happened next defied Zara's understanding of physics and biology. With a single fluid motion, the human wrenched the limb backward, tearing it clean from the creature's body. Dark ichor sprayed across the chamber floor as the razor claw emitted a piercing shriek that made the observation glass vibrate. The severed limb, still twitching, was casually tossed aside as Wyatt darted away from the creature's retaliatory strike. "By the stars," someone whispered behind Zara. The battle, if such a one-sided encounter, could be called that continued for another 7 minutes. Throughout it all, Wyatt moved with a precision and strength that seemed utterly impossible for a species from a medium-gravity world. He dodged strikes that should have eviscerated him, withstood blows that should have shattered bones, and methodically dismantled the galaxy's most feared predator with his bare hands. When it was over, the razor claw lay in pieces across the chamber floor, its natural armor split and peeled back like the rind of a fruit, its internal organs exposed for study. Wyatt stood amidst the carnage, his breathing only slightly elevated spatters of alien blood decorating his utility suit. He looked directly at the observation window, though he shouldn't have been able to see through it, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then, without waiting for instructions, he walked toward a decontamination chamber at the side of the room. "Remarkable specimen," Dr. Lyrax murmured, his skin now pulsing with rapid blues and purples. "This confirms the data from Earth. The gravity differential alone doesn't explain it. There must be something in their genetics." Zara couldn't tear her eyes away from the dismembered razor claw. She had studied predatory species across a dozen star systems, had witnessed apex hunters in their natural habitats, had even survived encounters with organisms that defied conventional classification. But never had she seen anything like this, a supposedly primitive mammal, dismantling an evolved killing machine, as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience. "I need access to his medical records," she said, her scientific curiosity overriding her initial shock. Dr. Lyrax gave a gesture of affirmation. "That's why you're here, Captain Kale. The Alliance is curious about human potential, especially given their rapid expansion in the outer colonies." "Curious or concerned?" Zara asked, finally turning away from the grisly scene below. The Talaxian's skin darkened momentarily, his species equivalent of a shrug. "Is there a difference when it comes to a species that can do that?" He gestured toward the chamber. Later, alone in her assigned quarters, Zara reviewed the data she had been provided. Wyatt Cross, age 37. Earth years, had served in Earth's elite military units before becoming a freelance security consultant. His medical scans showed nothing unusual by human standards. Slightly elevated bone density, well-developed musculature, the usual assortment of old injuries consistent with his profession. But something wasn't adding up. The strength and speed he had displayed went beyond what even an exceptional human should be capable of. There had to be more to the story. A message alert chimed on her terminal. It was from Dr. Lyrax, Xenoforge Corporation representatives, requesting meeting regarding today's specimen processing. 0900 hours tomorrow. Your presence requested. Xenoforge, one of the galaxy's largest weapons manufacturers, with ties to multiple governments within and outside the Alliance. What interest would they have in a human mercenary? Zara's unease deepened. Her official mission parameters mentioned nothing about corporate involvement. This was supposed to be purely scientific research, aimed at understanding human adaptability for the Alliance database. She brought up the recording of Wyatt's encounter with the Razorclaw, studying his movements, frame by frame. There was a fluidity to his actions, a precision that spoke of more than just training. It was as if he instinctively knew exactly how much force to apply, exactly where to strike for maximum effect. A second message arrived, this one encrypted with High Council protocols. Assessment of human genetic potential highest priority. All data to remain classified. Evaluate threat level and report directly to Council. Outsider interest confirmed. Threat level. Not research potential or scientific value, but threat level. Zara closed the files and lay back on her sleeping platform, her mind racing. What had begun as a straightforward ecological survey had suddenly become something far more complex and potentially dangerous. She found herself wondering whose side she was really on, the Alliance that had raised and trained her, or the truth that might lie hidden in human DNA. Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by dreams of claws and blood, and the unsettling calm in Wyatt Cross's eyes as he tore apart a nightmare. The meeting with Xenoforge representatives took place in one of the station's secure conference rooms, a space deliberately designed to intimidate with its high ceilings, dim lighting, and the vast expanse of stars, visible through the viewport that dominated one wall. Zara arrived early, finding Dr. Lyrax already present, engaged in quiet conversation with a human female in a crisp business suit. The woman turned as Zara entered, revealing sharp features and calculating eyes that assessed the Zenari with undisguised interest. "Captain Kale, I presume," the woman said, extending a hand in the human greeting custom. "Miranda Voss, Xenoforge Special Projects Division. Thank you for joining us." Zara inclined her head slightly, but did not take the offered hand. "I wasn't aware that my research required corporate oversight." Voss smiled, a thin expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Not oversight, Captain. Partnership. Xenoforge has significant interests in frontier security, and your work with anomalous biological specimens is of great value to us." Before Zara could respond, the door slid open again, admitting 3 more individuals, 2 security personnel in Xenoforge tactical gear, and between them, a tall, imposing human male with the rigid posture of a career military officer. Silver streaked his temples, and a network of cybernetic implants traced patterns beneath the skin of his left cheek and neck. "Colonel Richter," Voss said, gesturing to the newcomer, "head of Xenoforge's Special Acquisition Division." Richter did not smile or offer any greeting. His cold gray eyes swept the room, lingering momentarily on Zara, before fixing on Dr. Lyrax. "The preliminary reports are impressive," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in Zara's chest. "Cross's performance exceeded expectations." "Indeed," Dr. Lyrax replied, his skin pulsing with nervous yellow light. "The specimen was completely disassembled in under 8 minutes. We've never seen such efficiency, especially from a non-augmented subject." "Non-augmented," Richter arched an eyebrow. "Are we certain of that?" A holographic display activated in the center of the conference table, projecting a 3-dimensional image of Wyatt Cross's anatomical scan. Various points on his body were highlighted with pulsing red markers. "Standard human biological profile," Voss explained, manipulating the display to zoom in on Cross's muscular structure. "No cybernetic enhancements, no genetic modifications detectable by our current scanning technology. Yet he exhibits strength, speed, and endurance far beyond normal human parameters." Richter circled the table slowly, studying the projection from all angles. And you believe this is natural? That's what we're trying to determine. Zara interjected her scientific curiosity, momentarily overriding her suspicion. Human physiology is remarkably adaptable, but what we witnessed yesterday goes beyond simple adaptation. Precisely why we're interested, Voss said with another cold smile. Imagine security forces with such capabilities. Imagine the potential for frontier colonies facing hostile indigenous life. Imagine the weapons applications, Zara said flatly. Richter's eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then he gave a slight nod as if acknowledging a worthy opponent. Xenoforge is a security company, Captain Kale. We provide solutions to dangerous problems. The Razorclaw incident on Remora 4 cost 73 lives. If we can develop better protections based on human resilience, isn't that a net positive for the galaxy? My assignment is to study and report, Zara replied carefully, not to assist in weapons development. Your assignment, Voss cut in, is whatever the Alliance High Council deems it to be, and they have already approved our participation in this research. She slid a data crystal across the table, the same vibrant blue used for High Council direct orders. Zara picked it up reluctantly, inserting it into her personal device. The authentication codes were valid, the orders clear. She was to cooperate fully with Xenoforge in the assessment of human biological capabilities. We'll need tissue samples, Richter said, once he saw that Zara had verified the orders. Comprehensive ones, bone, muscle, neural tissue. Cross won't agree to that, Dr. Lyrax said, his skin now pulsing with distressed purple hues. The contract only specified observation and standard medical scans. Richter's expression didn't change, but something cold and calculating entered his eyes. Then, we'll need to revise the terms of his employment, by whatever means necessary. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Zara felt a chill run down her spine, her protective membrane sliding involuntarily over her eyes, a biological response to perceived danger. I'll speak with him, she heard herself say. As the scientific lead on this project, it would be appropriate for me to explain the expanded research parameters. Voss and Richter exchanged a glance. Very well, Richter said after a moment. You have until tomorrow to secure his cooperation voluntarily. After that, we'll pursue alternative approaches. The meeting adjourned shortly thereafter, with Voss providing Zara the access codes to Wyatt Cross's temporary quarters on Level 4. As she made her way through the station's crowded corridors, Zara's mind raced. She had no intention of convincing Cross to submit to Xenoforge's invasive sampling, but she needed information needed to understand what she had witnessed in that processing chamber. She found his quarters easily enough, a Spartan efficiency unit, in a section primarily occupied by transient contractors. The door slid open at her approach, revealing Wyatt Cross, seated on a standard-issue sleeping platform, cleaning what appeared to be an antique projectile weapon technology, so outdated it wasn't even restricted on most stations. He didn't look up as she entered. Captain Kale, he said, his hands continuing their methodical work. I figured someone would come. Didn't expect it to be you. You know who I am. Zara remained near the door, studying him carefully. In the sterile light of the quarters, without the distraction of the Razorclaw, she could better appreciate the subtle differences between this human and others she had encountered. There was a density to him, a contained power, visible in even his smallest movements. Zenari Female Alliance uniform with xenobiology insignia, watching me take apart that overgrown bug yesterday. He finally looked up, dark eyes, assessing her with the same detached interest he'd shown the Razorclaw. Doesn't take a genius to figure out you're studying me. And that doesn't concern you? A slight shrug, the movement rippling through muscles that seemed too dense for his frame. Should it? I've been studied before. Governments, corporations, scientists. Everyone wants to know what makes humans tick, especially ones like me. Zara moved further into the room, allowing the door to close behind her. Xenoforge wants tissue samples, invasive ones. For the first time, something like actual emotion crossed Wyatt's face, a flicker of cold anger quickly suppressed. Of course they do. He reassembled the weapon with lightning speed, the parts clicking together with practiced precision. And what do you want, Captain? The truth, she said simply. What I saw yesterday shouldn't be possible. A Razor Claw's exoskeleton has a tensile strength, comparable to industrial serum steel. You tore it apart with your bare hands. A smile ghosted across his features there, and gone so quickly, she almost missed it. Just because something shouldn't be possible doesn't mean it isn't. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, his height allowing him to look down at her, despite the Zanari's naturally tall stature. But you didn't come here just to tell me about Xenoforge's shopping list. Zara hesitated, acutely aware that she was venturing into dangerous territory. Her duty to the Alliance demanded that she follow orders, assist Xenoforge, report her findings to the High Council. But something deeper, her commitment to scientific truth, perhaps, or maybe just basic ethical principles, pulled her in another direction. Xenoforge isn't just studying humans, she said finally. They're assessing a threat, and I need to know if they're right to be concerned. Wyatt studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he moved to a small console embedded in the wall, his fingers dancing across the interface. The room's monitoring systems powered down with an audible hum, and a subtle field of static electricity raised the fine scales on Zara's skin. Privacy field, he explained, moving back to stand before her. Blocks audio and most electromagnetic surveillance. Won't last long before station security notices, so listen carefully. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. There's a genetic experiment underway. Has been for decades. Not official, nothing any government would admit to, but real nonetheless. Human soldiers enhanced through selective breeding rather than direct modification. Maintaining the appearance of natural evolution, while pushing the boundaries of what's possible. You're one of these experiments, Zara asked, struggling to keep the scientific fascination from her voice. A short, bitter laugh escaped him. No, I'm what they're trying to replicate. Earthborn old stock raised in 1.5G conditions, by choice, not necessity. There are pockets of OS communities that maintained Earth standard, or higher gravity, even as technology made it unnecessary. Natural selection at its finest. It made a certain kind of sense. Earth's gravity, while not exceptional by galactic standards, was higher than many habitable worlds. Humans who maintained such conditions, generation after generation, would develop greater density in muscle and bone. But that alone doesn't explain your performance yesterday, Zara pressed. The speed, the precision. Training, Wyatt cut in. Decades of it, and... He hesitated, seeming to debate with himself before continuing. There are theories that humans haven't reached our evolutionary endpoint, that we're still adapting, faster than should be possible. The implications were staggering. If humans were indeed continuing to evolve at an accelerated rate, adapting to environments across multiple star systems simultaneously. A warning chime from the console interrupted her thoughts. The privacy field flickered its effectiveness, degrading as station security began to counter it. You should go, Wyatt said, moving toward the door. Consider carefully who you report to, Captain. Not everyone in your alliance has the galaxy's best interests at heart. As the door slid open, he added in a voice so low she barely caught it. Neon District, the Broken Orbit, tomorrow's second shift. If you want the full story. Then, he was gone, striding purposefully down the corridor toward the station's central hub, leaving Zara with more questions than answers, and a growing sense that she had stumbled into something far more complex than a simple, scientific investigation. The Neon District pulsed with chaotic energy, a stark contrast to the ordered efficiency of Orion Prime's official sectors. Here, in the sprawling network of corridors and chambers that had once been maintenance tunnels and storage facilities, the station's less reputable activities flourished. Holographic advertisements bathed everything in a kaleidoscope of garish colors, while the air hung heavy with the mingled scents of exotic cuisine, illegally imported intoxicants, and too many bodies in too little space. Zara moved through the crowds with her hood pulled low, her distinctive scales concealed beneath drab synthetic fabric. Alliance personnel rarely ventured into the Neon District, and a Zanari officer would attract unwanted attention. Her sensitive hearing strained against the cacophony of a dozen different species, haggling, arguing, and celebrating in a babble of languages, some so obscure that her translator implant struggled to process them. The broken orbit proved easy enough to find a dingy establishment, nestled between a pawnshop dealing in salvaged starship parts and a noodle stand that catered to species with silicon-based digestive systems. Its entrance was marked by a flickering holographic sign depicting a spacecraft breaking apart, the animation looping endlessly as pieces scattered and reformed. Inside the bar was dimly lit and surprisingly quiet, a pocket of relative calm amidst the district's frenzy. The clientele appeared to be primarily spacers, cargo haulers, scouts, and the occasional mercenary, their hardened expressions and worn attire marking them as people who lived on the edge of civilized space. Wyatt sat alone at a booth in the far corner, his back to the wall, his positioning giving him clear sight lines to both the main entrance and the kitchen access corridor. A half-empty glass of amber liquid sat before him untouched, since Zara had entered. She slid into the seat opposite him, keeping her hood up. "I'm not accustomed to clandestine meetings in illegal establishments," she said, by way of greeting. A hint of amusement flickered across Wyatt's otherwise impassive features. Not illegal, just unlicensed. And sometimes the only safe places to talk are the ones everyone assumes are dangerous. A server droid, an outdated model with mismatched replacement parts, hovered to their table. Wyatt ordered another of whatever he was drinking, while Zara requested filtered water, a safe choice given her unfamiliarity with the establishment's inventory. "You're taking a risk coming here," Wyatt observed, once the droid had moved away. "Alliance officers aren't welcome in this part of the station. Neither are subjects of Xenoforge interest," Zara countered. "Yet here we both are." His lips quirked upward in what might have been a smile. "Fair point. Though I suspect they're watching you more closely than me. You're the one with access to official research data." The server droid returned with their drinks. Zara waited until it had drifted well out of auditory range before continuing. "You mentioned a genetic experiment yesterday. Something about replicating your natural abilities." Wyatt took a small sip of his drink, eyes never leaving her face. "What do you know about Earth's gravity wells?" The question seemed like a non sequitur, but Zara sensed it was important. Earth has varied gravitational fields due to differences in crustal density and thickness. Some regions experience higher localized gravity, though the variations are minimal, certainly not enough to explain your capabilities. "Not natural gravity wells," Wyatt clarified. "Artificial ones. After the Third Resource War, around 2157, Earth's population was scattered. Some fled to the colonies, others to deep ocean habitats or orbital platforms. But some went to the gravity wells communities built in the most hostile regions, deliberately engineered to maintain old Earth gravity, or higher." Zara's scientific curiosity piqued. Why would they choose to live in higher gravity? The physical strain alone would force adaptation, Wyatt finished for her. That was the point. They believed humanity was growing soft, that technology was allowing weaker genes to propagate. The wells were their answer, environments where only the strongest survived and reproduced. "Eugenics," Zara said, unable to keep the distaste from her voice. "Most advanced civilizations had abandoned such practices millennia ago." Wyatt shrugged. "They preferred to call it guided evolution. I was born in Olympus Well, one of the oldest communities. 1.5 times standard Earth gravity, thin atmosphere temperature fluctuations that could kill the unprepared within hours. By the time I was 10, I could outrun, outfight, and outlast any adult from a standard G environment. And Xenoforge wants to weaponize this adaptation, Zara surmised. Create soldiers with your capabilities but under their control. They're not the only ones, Wyatt's expression darkened. Every major power has been trying to replicate the well-born advantage for decades. Gene therapy, selective breeding programs, even straight cloning, none of it works quite right. Something about the natural adaptation process creates synergies they can't synthesize. It was fascinating from a purely scientific perspective. Zara had studied convergent evolution across hundreds of worlds, but never a deliberately engineered environmental pressure driving adaptive change within a single species. But why tell me this? She asked the question that had been nagging at her since their first meeting. What do you gain by exposing these secrets? Wyatt leaned forward, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. Because Xenoforge doesn't just want to study Wellborn's captain. They want to eliminate us. We're the competition, the proof that their expensive super soldier programs are inferior to natural selection. The tissue samples they want from me aren't for research. They're to develop targeted bioweapons. The claim was so outrageous that Zara's first instinct was disbelief. Yet, she had seen the cold calculation in Colonel Richter's eyes, had sensed the unstated agenda behind Xenoforge's sudden interest in human biology. You have evidence of this, she pressed. Wyatt reached into his jacket, producing a data crystal, similar to the one Voss had given her. But this one glowed with a subtle red light. Intercepted communications between Xenoforge and their military contacts. Details of Project Prometheus, their plan to synthesize well-born abilities, while eliminating the original stock. They've already begun on fringe colonies introducing engineered pathogens that only affect those with specific adaptive markers. Before Zara could respond, a commotion erupted near the bar's entrance. 3 security personnel in standard station uniforms were moving through the crowd, their hands resting on holstered weapons as they scanned the dimly lit interior. Station security, Wyatt muttered, sliding the data crystal across the table. But not here for routine patrol. Someone's looking for us. Zara pocketed the crystal, her mind racing. If station security was involved, it meant Xenoforge had significant influence, or that her own superiors in the Alliance had decided she'd gone off mission. Is there another way out? She asked, already calculating potential escape routes. Wyatt nodded toward the kitchen access corridor. Leads to the service tunnels. We can lose them in the maintenance network. He rose smoothly, his movements unhurried despite the urgency of their situation. Don't run. Don't look at them. Just walk normally toward the kitchen like you belong here. They had made it halfway across the establishment when one of the security officers spotted them. The alarmed shout was unmistakable, even amidst the ambient noise, followed by the distinctive whine of energy weapons being powered up. Change of plans, Wyatt said, his voice remaining remarkably calm. Now we run. What followed was a chaotic blur of motion as they fled through the kitchen, ignoring the startled protests of the staff, and into the cramped service tunnels beyond. Wyatt moved with incredible speed, despite the confined space, navigating the labyrinthine passages, as if he had memorized their layout, pulling Zara along when the unfamiliar terrain slowed her progress. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew, as station security called for backup, their heavy footfalls echoing in the metal corridors. An energy bolt sizzled past Zara's head, impacting the wall ahead in a shower of sparks. The air filled with the acrid smell of scorched insulation and ozone. They're shooting to kill, she gasped, her respiratory membranes fluttering with exertion. That's not standard protocol for station security. Because they're not station security, Wyatt replied grimly, pulling her around another corner. Xenoforge, private contractors in borrowed uniforms. Real security would follow capture protocols. They emerged into a vast, cathedral-like chamber, filled with humming machinery, one of the station's atmospheric processors, its massive turbines drawing in stale air and cycling it through purification systems before redistributing it throughout Orion Prime. The din was overwhelming, vibrating through Zara's bones and momentarily disorienting her sensitive hearing. Wyatt guided her onto a narrow maintenance walkway that circled the chamber's perimeter, high above the machinery below. They were halfway across when the access door behind them burst open, admitting 5 armed figures in the false security uniforms. End of the line cross. The lead pursuer's voice was amplified, cutting through the mechanical cacophony. Surrender the Zanari, and we might let you live. Wyatt pushed Zara behind him, his body tensing in a way she now recognized as preparation for combat. Stay back, he murmured. And when I tell you to run, head for the tertiary access port on the far side. It leads to the shuttle bays. Before she could protest, he had vaulted over the walkway's railing, dropping 30 meters to the chamber floor below. His landing should have shattered every bone in his legs, but he absorbed the impact with a slight flex of his knees, then immediately launched himself toward the pursuing security team. What followed was unlike anything Zara had ever witnessed, even after yesterday's demonstration with the Razor Claw. In the confined space of the walkway, against armed opponents, who should have had every advantage, Wyatt moved, like living mercury fluid, unstoppable and lethal. He reached the first man before he could properly aim, disarming him, with a twist of the wrist that looked casual, but must have exerted tremendous force, given the crack of breaking bones that followed. The energy weapon went spinning into the abyss below as its former owner collapsed, screaming. The second and third attackers fired simultaneously, their energy bolts converging on Wyatt's position, only to hit empty air as he dropped into a roll that brought him inside their guard. A sweeping kick took both men's legs from under them, sending them crashing to the metal grating. Wyatt was already moving past them toward the fourth attacker, whose panicked fire went wild, missing the human completely. The fifth man, showing more presence of mind than his colleagues, turned his weapon toward Zara instead. "Stop or she dies," he shouted. It was the wrong move. Wyatt's expression, which had remained eerily calm throughout the fight, transformed into something cold and predatory. He pivoted, snatched the fallen weapon of one of the men he'd disabled, and fired in one continuous motion. The energy bolt caught the fifth attacker in the center of his chest, the impact lifting him off his feet and sending him crashing against the access door. He slid to the floor, leaving a smear of dark fluid on the metal. The fourth man, now faced with Wyatt's undivided attention, made a desperate lunge with a vibroblade that had materialized in his hand. The blade, capable of slicing through starship hull plating, should have disemboweled the human. Instead, Wyatt caught the man's wrist mid-strike, arresting the motion completely. For a moment, they stood frozen in that impossible tableau, the attacker straining with all his might against the immovable object that was Wyatt's grip. Then, with a single sharp twist, Wyatt broke the man's arm and relieved him of the vibroblade in one fluid motion. "I told you to run," he said to Zara, who realized she had been standing transfixed, watching the brief but brutal conflict. "They were going to kill you," she replied, surprised by the defensiveness in her own voice. A grim smile flickered across his features. "They were going to try." He gestured toward the far side of the chamber. "But we need to move. There will be more." They made it to the shuttle bays without further incident, though alarms were now blaring throughout this section of the station, indicating a security lockdown was in progress. The bay itself was a hive of activity. As passengers and cargo were being hurriedly processed, the station's administration clearly trying to clear all non-essential personnel before the situation escalated further. "We need to get off station," Wyatt said, surveying the crowded embarkation area. "Xenoforge won't stop coming, and your Alliance superiors won't protect you once they realize you've gone rogue." "I haven't gone rogue," Zara protested, though the data crystal, burning a hole in her pocket, suggested otherwise. "I'm pursuing the truth. That's my duty as a scientist and an Alliance officer." Wyatt's expression softened fractionally, the first real emotion he displayed toward her. Noble sentiment. But right now, we need to focus on staying alive long enough for that truth to matter. He led her to a smaller secondary docking area, where private vessels were moored. Most were luxury yachts, belonging to wealthy merchants, or diplomatic shuttles for minor officials, but at the far end sat a battered transport craft that had clearly seen better days. Its hull bore the scars of micrometeorite impacts and energy weapon fire hastily patched, but never properly repaired. "Yours?" Zara asked, eyeing the vessel dubiously. "Mine enough," Wyatt replied cryptically. He approached an access panel beside the docking umbilical, entering a complex sequence that caused the vessel's entry hatch to cycle open. "After you, Captain." The interior matched the exterior functional, but worn with exposed conduits and mismatched replacement parts, giving it a cobbled-together appearance. Despite this, Zara noted that the navigation and weapon systems appeared to be cutting-edge, incongruously new, amid the general shabbiness. Wyatt moved to the pilot station, his hands flying over the controls with practiced ease. The engines rumbled to life, a deep vibration that Zara felt through the deck plates. "Where exactly are we going?" she asked, strapping herself into the co-pilot's chair. "Remora 4. Wyatt replied, not looking up from the pre-flight sequence. "The source of your ecological disturbance and the location of Xenoforge's main bioweapons research facility. If we want proof of what they're planning, that's where we'll find it." The ship detached from its docking clamps with a metallic groan, maneuvering thrusters, pushing it clear of the station's gravitational field. Through the viewports, Zara could see security vessels scrambling to intercept them, but Wyatt had timed their departure perfectly. The incoming commercial freighter created just enough confusion to allow their small craft to slip away. As they accelerated toward the jump point that would take them to the Remora system, Zara found herself watching Wyatt's profile, illuminated by the blue glow of the navigation console. He had killed at least one person during their escape, possibly more, yet showed no sign of distress or remorse. Was this the cold efficiency that made humans so dangerous? Or was it something specific to this particular specimen, this product of guided evolution from the gravity wells of Earth? "You're staring," he said, without turning his enhanced senses, apparently alert, even when his attention seemed focused elsewhere. "I'm analyzing," she corrected. "It's what scientists do." A low chuckle escaped him, the sound so unexpected, it momentarily startled her. "And what have you concluded so far, Dr. Kale?" The formal title caught her off guard. She had introduced herself as Captain, her military rank not her academic one. That he knew her scientific credentials was yet another indication of how well-informed he was. "That you're either the greatest threat the Alliance has ever faced," she said honestly, "or its best hope for understanding humanity's true potential." Wyatt glanced at her, then his dark eyes reflecting the stars, streaking past as they accelerated to jump velocity. "Why not both?" he asked, before returning his attention to the controls. The ship shuddered as it entered the jump conduit reality, outside the viewport smearing into a tunnel of distorted light. Ahead lay Remora 4, a world of dense jungles and acidic oceans, home to the Razor Claw, and whatever secrets Xenoforge was willing to kill to protect. And beside her sat a human who had torn apart the galaxy's most feared predator, with his bare hands, a living weapon more dangerous than anything she had studied in her long career as a xenobiologist. Yet, instead of fear, Zara felt only a growing curiosity, and perhaps, though she would scarcely admit it to herself, a whisper of something like admiration. "Bah." The descent to Remora 4 was turbulent, their small craft bucking against atmospheric currents that seemed determined to dash them against the jagged mountain ranges below. Outside, the viewport's dense storm clouds boiled with unnatural energy, occasional flashes of purple lightning, illuminating formations that looked suspiciously like massive floating organisms, rather than mere weather patterns. "The planet's ecosystem is in flux," Zara observed, studying the sensor readings with professional interest, despite their precarious situation. "These energy discharges aren't natural. They're biological in origin. Something is affecting the native life forms on a fundamental level. Wyatt guided the ship through a particularly violent pocket of turbulence, his hands steady on the controls. Xenoforge has been conducting experiments here for over a year. Weapons testing mostly seeing how different species respond to targeted genetic disruptors. Using the razor claws as test subjects, Zara's scientific ethics rebelled at the thought, despite the creature's fearsome reputation. Among others, Wyatt's expression hardened. The mining colonies weren't destroyed by random razor claw attacks. They were control groups, unwitting test subjects exposed to engineered pathogens alongside the native fauna. Xenoforge wanted to see how the diseases jumped between species. The implications were horrifying. Such research violated every ethical standard established by the Alliance, not to mention numerous interstellar treaties governing biological warfare. "How do you know all this?" she asked the question that had been nagging at her since their meeting in the broken orbit. Wyatt's hands tightened momentarily on the controls. "Because I helped them establish the facility. 6 months ago, before I understood what they were really doing. Before I found the records of similar tests on human settlements, specifically communities with well-born populations." The ship broke through the cloud layer, revealing a landscape both beautiful and alien. Vast forests of iridescent vegetation stretched to the horizon, interrupted by meandering rivers that glowed with bioluminescent algae. In the distance, massive rock formations jutted skyward, like the spines of some colossal beast, their surfaces smooth and reflective. The Banshee Forest. Wyatt explained, guiding the ship toward a clearing near the edge of the tree line. Named for the sounds the wind makes through those crystal formations. The indigenous population believed the noises were the cries of the dead, warning the living of danger. "Are there still indigenous populations?" Zara asked, surprised. The Alliance records had listed Remora 4 as uninhabited by sentient species. "Not anymore." Wyatt's tone made it clear what had happened to them. They sat down in a small clearing, the ship's landing struts sinking slightly into the loamy soil. The engines powered down with a diminishing whine, leaving them in a silence broken only by the ping of cooling metal and the distant eerie whistling that gave the forest its name. "We'll need to proceed on foot from here," Wyatt said, rising from the pilot's chair. "The facility is built into one of the larger crystal formations, about 15 kilometers north. Their defensive systems would detect a ship approaching directly." He moved to a storage compartment near the rear of the cabin, retrieving what appeared to be standard exploration gear, environmental suits, portable sensor arrays, emergency rations. But Zara noted that the equipment had been modified, reinforced in ways that suggested preparation for combat, rather than scientific expedition. "Here," he said, handing her a suit. "The atmosphere is technically breathable, but the spore count is high. These will filter out anything harmful." As they prepared to disembark, a thought occurred to Zara. "Won't Xenoforge be expecting us? They must know we escaped Orion Prime by now." Wyatt checked the charge on an energy pistol, before holstering it at his hip. "They'll be looking for us, but not here. As far as they know, I'm aware of their general activities, but not the location of this specific facility. Our ship's transponder is broadcasting as a routine geological survey vessel, standard cover for this sector." The confidence in his voice was reassuring, but Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more dangerous than either of them anticipated. Still, the scientist in her was driven by an insatiable curiosity, both about Xenoforge's activities and about the human who continued to defy her understanding of what should be biologically possible. The planet's surface welcomed them with a riot of sensory input. The air, even filtered through the suit systems, carried complex aromas that reminded Zara of fermentation and growth. The ground beneath their feet seemed almost springy, composed of layers of decaying vegetation that had accumulated over millennia. And the sounds beyond the haunting whistle from the crystal spires, the forest pulsed with the calls of unseen creatures, creating a symphony of clicks, howls, and rhythmic thrumming that seemed to follow no pattern she could discern. "Stay close," Wyatt advised as they entered the tree line. The forest changes after dark. Predator-prey dynamics shift, and the plant life becomes more interactive. Interactive. Zara couldn't keep the professional interest from her voice despite their circumstances. Carnivorous. This whole ecosystem has evolved unusual defensive mechanisms. The plants hunt at night, the herbivores become omnivores, and the apex predators. He gestured toward a massive claw mark, scored into the trunk of a nearby tree, at least 3 meters off the ground. They get more aggressive. They move through the forest with as much speed as caution would allow, Wyatt setting a pace that would have been grueling for most beings, but which Zara, with her Zenari physiology, managed to maintain. The terrain grew increasingly challenging as they progressed the uniform forest, giving way to rocky outcroppings and sudden ravines that forced them to adjust their course repeatedly. As the twin suns of the Remora system began to sink toward the horizon, casting the forest in an eerie purple twilight, Wyatt called a halt beside a small stream that bubbled with an internal luminescence. "We should rest briefly," he said, surveying their surroundings with a vigilance that never seemed to waver. "The facility is just beyond that rise. Once night falls completely, we'll have better chances of approaching undetected." Zara removed her helmet, allowing her sensory organs to sample the unfiltered air directly. Her species had evolved highly discriminating chemical receptors, capable of detecting molecular compositions that even the most advanced sensors might miss. "There's something unusual in the atmosphere," she said, after a moment, her specialized membranes fluttering as they processed the information. "Engineered compounds, complex proteins that shouldn't occur naturally. They're degrading rapidly, but the concentration suggests deliberate dispersal." Wyatt's expression hardened. "Aerosol testing. They're releasing their bioweapons into the environment to see how they interact with the ecosystem." He knelt beside the stream, activating a small device that analyzed the water's composition. "It's in the hydrosphere too. Elevated levels of synthetic retroviruses designed to attach to specific genetic markers." "This goes beyond weapons research," Zara said, her scientific horror growing with each revelation. "They're attempting to fundamentally reshape an entire planet's biosphere. The ecological cascade effects alone could—" A sound interrupted her, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Wyatt was on his feet instantly, energy pistol drawn, his body language shifting subtly into a combat stance that looked almost predatory in itself. "Put your helmet back on," he said quietly. "Now." Zara complied, the suit's systems resealing with a soft hiss. Through the transparent faceplate, she saw movement in the underbrush about 30 meters away, a ripple of displacement, too large to be caused by the local equivalent of small game. "Razor Claw," she whispered, her voice transmitted to Wyatt's helmet via short-range comm. He shook his head slightly. "Bigger, enhanced. Xenoforge has been experimenting on them, selective breeding chemical stimulants, neural rewiring. They call them alphas." As if in confirmation of his words, a massive form emerged from the vegetation. It resembled the razor claw that Wyatt had dismantled in the processing chamber, but only in the way a wolf resembles a lapdog. Standing nearly 5 meters tall, its exoskeleton gleamed with an unnatural metallic sheen, while cybernetic implants protruded from its skull and spine. Its 6 limbs ended in claws that seemed to shimmer with an internal energy, and its eyes, all 8 of them, glowed with a malevolent intelligence that no natural predator should possess. "Don't move," Wyatt murmured. "Their visual systems are based on movement detection. If we stay still long enough, it might—" The creature's head swiveled toward them with mechanical precision, its compound eyes focusing with unsettling directness. A ridge of spines along its back rose and began to vibrate, producing a high-pitched keening that set Zara's teeth on edge even through her helmet. "It's calling others," Wyatt said, all pretense of concealment abandoned. "Run, now." What followed was a nightmarish chase through increasingly dense forest. The enhanced razor claw, the Alpha, moved with a speed that belied its massive size, crashing through vegetation and leaping ravines that should have slowed or stopped it. Zara pushed her body to its limits, her respiratory system straining to process enough oxygen to fuel her desperate flight. Beside her, Wyatt moved with the fluid grace she had witnessed during the fight on Orion Prime, but now, with an urgency that spoke of genuine danger. Even with his enhanced strength and reflexes, the Alpha represented a threat he couldn't simply overpower. They burst from the forest edge into a rocky clearing, dominated by one of the massive crystal formations. Up close, it revealed itself to be a structure of impossible complexity, a geometric lattice that seemed to defy conventional physics, its surfaces reflecting the fading light in mesmerizing patterns. There, Wyatt pointed to a nearly invisible seam in the crystal's base. Maintenance access. The facility is inside. They had almost reached it when the Alpha emerged from the tree line behind them, its keening cry now joined by answering calls from deeper in the forest. Reinforcements were coming. "Get inside," Wyatt ordered, pushing Zara toward the hidden entrance. "I'll hold it off." "That's suicide," she protested, even as her scientific mind calculated the odds and found them vanishingly small. "You can't." "I've killed one before. I can do it again." There was a terrible certainty in his voice, a cold confidence that spoke of experiences Zara couldn't begin to imagine. "Go. Find the evidence we need." Before she could argue further, Wyatt turned to face the approaching monstrosity, his posture shifting into the same combat readiness she had witnessed in the processing chamber. But this time, there was something different, a focus, an intensity that transformed him from a merely exceptional specimen into something almost elemental. The Alpha charged its massive form covering the ground between them with frightening speed. Wyatt waited until the last possible moment before dodging, not merely evading, but using the creature's momentum against it, his hand lashing out to tear free one of the cybernetic implants protruding from its flank. The creature's shriek of rage and pain echoed across the clearing, loud enough to make Zara's sensitive ears ring, despite her helmet's protection. It whirled with unexpected agility, one massive claw sweeping toward Wyatt in a blow that would have cut a normal human in half. Instead, Wyatt caught the limb mid-strike, a moment of impossible physics that Zara's scientific mind struggled to process. Tendons stood out on his arms and neck as he strained against the creature's strength, the two of them locked in a contest of raw power that defied biological limitations. For 3 heartbeats they remained frozen in that tableau, the human and the monster neither giving ground. Then, with a motion almost too fast to follow, Wyatt twisted and pulled, using the Alpha's own strength and mass against it. The sound of rending chitin filled the air as the limb tore free dark ichor, sprang across the rocky ground. The Alpha reeled back, its balance compromised, but still far from defeated. Its remaining limbs lashed out in a frenzy of strikes, forcing Wyatt to dodge and weave with increasingly narrow margins of safety. One claw caught his shoulder, tearing through the environmental suit and the flesh beneath, drawing a spray of crimson that reflected in the crystal formation like scattered rubies. Zara found herself frozen, unable to flee to safety, as Wyatt had ordered, unable to tear her eyes away from the brutal primal confrontation unfolding before her. This was beyond science, beyond rational analysis. This was life and death in its most fundamental form, stripped of civilization's veneer. Wyatt, despite his injury, seemed to grow more focused, more precise in his movements. He used the Alpha's severed limb as a weapon, striking at the joints and sensory organs where the exoskeleton was thinnest. Each blow landed with terrible precision, each movement flowing into the next with a grace that seemed impossible in the midst of such violence. And then, in a sequence too fast for Zara to fully process, Wyatt was behind the creature, climbing its thrashing form with the agility of a born predator. He reached the juncture where the cybernetic implants connected to the Alpha's neural cluster, and with one savage twist tore the entire assembly free. The Alpha convulsed, its coordinated attacks dissolving into spasmodic thrashing as its enhanced nervous system collapsed. Wyatt rode the dying creature to the ground, continuing to dismantle it with methodical efficiency, even as it fell. By the time the massive form crashed to the rocky soil, it was already coming apart, its once fearsome structure reduced to disconnected segments of exoskeleton and cybernetic components. Wyatt stood amidst the destruction, his breathing rapid, but controlled, dark blood streaming from the wound in his shoulder. In that moment, with the purple twilight casting harsh shadows across his features, and the ichor of his enemy staining his torn environment suit, he looked more alien to Zara than any non-humanoid species she had encountered in her long career. She watched a human rip an apex predator into chunks like nothing. And for the first time, she truly understood why some in the Alliance feared humanity's potential. Wyatt turned toward her, his expression shifting from combat focus back to the controlled alertness that seemed to be his baseline state. "More coming," he said, simply gesturing toward the forest where multiple keening cries now echoed. "We need to move, now." This time, Zara didn't argue. She activated the hidden access panel, revealing a narrow maintenance shaft that led into the heart of the crystal formation. They squeezed inside, just as more alpha forms emerged from the forest edge, their enhanced senses quickly detecting the remains of their fallen packmate. The shaft led them deeper into the structure, transitioning from natural crystal to obvious artificial construction. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow, suggesting that their entrance had triggered some kind of security protocol. "They know we're here," Wyatt said, pausing at a junction to check his bearings. "This is a tertiary access route. Main research levels should be 2 sections down." "How do you know the layout?" Zara asked the question that had been nagging at her since he'd mentioned the facility's location. A grim smile flickered across his features. "I helped design the security systems before I realized what they were really doing here." They moved quickly, but cautiously, through the labyrinthine corridors, Wyatt leading them on a circuitous route that avoided the main transit arteries, where security would be heaviest. The wound on his shoulder continued to seep blood, but he showed no signs of being impaired by it, another data point for Zara's growing file on human resilience. Eventually, they reached a heavily secured door, marked with Xenoforge's corporate symbol, a stylized helix wrapped around a blade. Wyatt approached the access panel, his fingers dancing across the interface with practiced ease. "Security protocols have been upgraded since I was last here," he muttered. "But the underlying architecture is still the same." After a moment of manipulation, the panel blinked green, and the door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Beyond lay a scene from a nightmare. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows above. Along both walls stretched rows of transparent containment units, each housing a different specimen. Some held variants of the razor claw, others contained local flora, and still others. "Stars preserve us." Zara breathed her scientific detachment, crumbling in the face of what she was seeing. "Those are sentients." Several units contained humanoid forms, some clearly human, others representing various Alliance species. All showed signs of experimentation, surgical modifications, partial cybernetic integration, evidence of genetic manipulation at the cellular level. "Project Prometheus," Wyatt said, his voice tight with controlled rage. Xenoforge's attempt to create the perfect adaptive soldier while eliminating natural competition. He moved to a central console, interfacing with it, as Zara examined the containment units more closely. The data scrolling across the displays confirmed her worst fears. These weren't merely weapons tests, but attempts at fundamental species redesign, creating biological weapons that could target specific genetic markers while leaving others unaffected. "They're violating every ethical principle the Alliance stands for," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This goes beyond corporate weapons research. This is genocide, carefully engineered genocide. Which is why we need to shut it down." Wyatt's hands moved across the console with increasing urgency. I'm downloading their research data now, but we need to destroy the physical samples. If these bioweapons were to be released on a larger scale. An alarm blared, cutting him off mid-sentence. Red warning lights began to pulse throughout the chamber, and a computerized voice announced, "Security breach detected. Containment protocols initiating. All personnel evacuate immediately." "They've found us," Wyatt said, checking the progress of the data transfer. "Not finished yet. Need 2 more minutes." The main entrance to the laboratory slid open, admitting a squad of security personnel in Xenoforge tactical gear. At their head strode a familiar figure, Colonel Richter, his cybernetic implants glowing with combat readiness, a high-powered energy rifle cradled in his arms. "Cross," he called, his amplified voice echoing throughout the chamber. "I wondered when you'd find your way here. Always were too clever for your own good." Wyatt positioned himself between Zara and the new arrivals, his body language shifting once again into combat readiness. "It's over, Richter. We have the data. The Alliance will know what you've been doing here." A cold smile spread across Richter's features. "The Alliance? You think they don't already know? Who do you think authorized this research in the first place?" He gestured toward the containment units. "Humanity is evolving too quickly, becoming too powerful. The Wellborns are just the beginning. Given enough time, your entire species will outstrip our ability to control you." Zara felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. Could it be true? Could the Alliance High Council have sanctioned this atrocity? The implications were too horrifying to contemplate. "Captain Kyle." Richter continued, turning his attention to her. "I'm disappointed. Your orders were to study human capabilities, not assist in espionage. The High Council will view this as treason." "The High Council can go to hell," she heard herself say, the words emerging before she could consider their implications. "This facility violates everything the Alliance claims to stand for. Everything I believe in as a scientist." Richter's expression hardened. "Idealism. How predictably naive." He raised his weapon. "Secure the Zenari. Kill the human." The security team fanned out energy weapons, charging with an ominous whine. Zara braced herself for the coming violence, knowing that even Wyatt's enhanced abilities might not be enough against a full tactical squad with Richter at their head. But Wyatt wasn't looking at the approaching security team. His attention had shifted to something on the console display, a slow smile spreading across his features. "You made one mistake, Richter," he said, pressing a final sequence into the console. "You built this facility into a living crystal." The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The crystal structure around them began to vibrate, a low-frequency resonance that rapidly increased in intensity. The transparent containment units cracked, then shattered, releasing their contents onto the laboratory floor. Warning klaxons blared as the facility's systems detected multiple containment breaches simultaneously. Chaos erupted as the security team found themselves facing not just Wyatt, but dozens of partially modified creatures, many driven insane by their confinement and experimentation. The enhanced razor claws were particularly devastating, tearing through the unprepared security personnel with vengeful fury. Wyatt grabbed Zara's arm, pulling her away from the console. "Time to go. This whole place is coming down." They fled through a secondary exit as the crystal structure's resonance continued to build, creating a cacophony that threatened to shatter Zara's eardrums, even through her helmet. Behind them, the sounds of combat and destruction faded beneath the growing vibration of the entire facility. They emerged onto a rocky outcropping high above the forest floor, the twin moons of Remora Forv, now illuminating the landscape with ethereal silver light. Below, the crystal formation that housed the Xenoforge facility was vibrating visibly, sections beginning to fracture and collapse inward. "What did you do?" Zara asked, watching the destruction unfold. "Introduced a cascading resonance frequency." Wyatt explained, his eyes reflecting the crystalline destruction below. "These formations are semi-sentient. They respond to specific harmonic patterns. I just gave it one it particularly didn't like." A massive explosion blossomed from within the disintegrating structure, sending crystal shards raining across the forest below. Secondary detonations followed as the facility's power systems overloaded, creating a spectacle of destruction that was both terrifying and strangely beautiful. Richter Zara's question needed no elaboration. Wyatt's expression remained impassive. If he's lucky, he died in the initial collapse. And if he's not lucky, then he's dealing with a lot of very angry test subjects who remember exactly what was done to them. They watched in silence as the facility continued to destroy itself, the process accelerating as each system failure triggered further cascade effects. Eventually, all that remained was a smoldering crater where the crystal formation had once stood, surrounded by a ring of crystalline debris that glittered in the moonlight. "We should go," Wyatt said finally. "The data transfer completed before everything went down. We have what we came for: proof of Xenoforge's activities and their connections within the Alliance." The journey back to their ship was strangely anticlimactic. The forest, which had seemed so threatening during their approach, now appeared almost peaceful, as if the destruction of the facility had restored some natural balance to the ecosystem. They encountered no more enhanced predators. Perhaps they had all been drawn to the facility during its collapse, or perhaps they were simply avoiding the aftermath of such destruction. Once aboard, Wyatt set course away from Remora 4, pushing the ship's engines to their limits to clear the system before any Xenoforge reinforcements could arrive. As the planet receded behind them, Zara found herself studying the human with renewed fascination. The wound on his shoulder, which should have been debilitating, had already stopped bleeding. His movements showed no sign of pain or restriction despite injuries that would have incapacitated most beings. And his calm in the face of such violence and destruction suggested a level of psychological resilience that matched his physical capabilities. "You're staring again," he observed, not looking up from the navigation controls. "You continue to defy biological expectations," she replied. "Your shoulder should require medical attention, yet you're acting as if it's a minor inconvenience." A slight shrug, which didn't even cause him to wince. "Enhanced healing. Another adaptation from the gravity wells. High-pressure environments cause frequent injuries. Those who healed quickly survived to reproduce." They lapsed into silence as the ship entered the jump conduit reality outside the viewports, distorting into streamers of light. It was only after they were safely in transit that Zara voiced the question that had been troubling her since Richter's revelation. What if he was telling the truth? What if the Alliance sanctioned this research? Wyatt leaned back in the pilot's chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "Then, you have a choice to make, Captain. Continue serving an organization that violates its own principles, or take a stand for what you believe is right." "It's not that simple," she protested. "The Alliance is more than just its leadership. There are billions of beings who rely on its protection, its stability." "And how stable will it be if it continues down this path?" Wyatt countered. "Creating bioweapons designed to exterminate specific populations, conducting unauthorized experiments on sentient beings. That's not the foundation of a lasting peace." He had a point, though Zara was reluctant to admit it. She had dedicated her life to the Alliance, to its ideals of cooperative discovery and mutual protection. The thought that its highest levels might be complicit in atrocities, like those she had witnessed on Remora 4, shook her to her core. The ship emerged from the jump conduit into the relative safety of a neutral system, one of the many independent trading hubs that existed in the spaces between major power blocks. Wyatt guided them toward a station that appeared to be constructed from the interconnected hulls of ancient starships, a ramshackle structure that somehow managed to look both precarious and indestructible. "The crossroads," he explained. "No extradition treaties, no corporate presence, no Alliance jurisdiction. We'll be safe here while we decide our next move." As they docked, Zara realized that sometime during their escape from Remora 4, the mission had become their problem, rather than just hers. She had crossed a line from observer to participant, from scientist to activist. And strangely, she found she didn't regret it. They secured quarters in one of the station's less disreputable sections, a small but clean apartment with separate sleeping areas and a shared common space. Wyatt immediately set up a secure terminal, transferring the data they had stolen from the Xenoforge facility for analysis. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Project Prometheus wasn't merely a corporate weapons program. It was a joint initiative between Xenoforge and elements within the Alliance High Council, specifically aimed at controlling humanity's evolutionary trajectory. The documents detailed plans for introducing engineered pathogens into human colonies, with high concentrations of well-born individuals, creating the appearance of natural disease outbreaks, while selectively eliminating those with the most advanced adaptations. "They're afraid of us," Wyatt said quietly, after they had reviewed the evidence. "Not just Xenoforge, the Alliance itself. They've run projections showing human evolutionary acceleration, continuing at its current rate. In 3 generations, we could have adaptations that make what I can do look primitive by comparison." And rather than explore the potential benefits of such evolution, they chose elimination, Zara said, disgust evident in her voice. "It violates every principle of scientific ethics. It's not just about science for them. It's about power." Wyatt closed the display, his expression grim. "Humanity is a young species by galactic standards, but we're adaptable in ways that older, more evolved species aren't. That makes us unpredictable. And the Alliance doesn't like unpredictability." They lapsed into silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside the viewport, the chaotic bustle of the crossroads continued, unabated ships of all descriptions arriving and departing, carrying beings and cargo from across the galaxy. Life continuing, as it always had, unaware of the conspiracy they had uncovered. "What will you do now?" Zara finally asked. Wyatt considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Distribute the evidence to independent news networks. Reach out to human colonies, especially those with well-born populations, warn them about the bioweapon threat. And then—" He trailed off, seemingly uncertain for the first time since she had met him. "And then," she prompted. "And then, I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent my life either following orders or working for whoever paid the most. This is different." "A cause rather than a contract," Zara suggested. A ghost of a smile touched his features. "Something like that." He turned to face her directly, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that was almost disconcerting. "What about you, Captain, back to the Alliance now that you know what some of its leaders are capable of?" It was the question she had been avoiding since their escape from Remora 4. Her duty, her training, her entire life's work had been in service to the Alliance and its principles. But those principles had been betrayed by the very leadership she had sworn to obey. "I'm a scientist first," she said slowly, working through her thoughts as she spoke. "Committed to truth and ethical discovery. If the Alliance no longer represents those values, then perhaps my loyalty should be to the values themselves, not the institution that has abandoned them." Wyatt nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "Then we have work to do." The next several days passed in a blur of activity. They established secure communications with independent journalists, academic institutions not affiliated with the Alliance, and representatives from human colonies known to have well-born populations. The evidence from Remora 4 was damning, detailed enough to prove the conspiracy beyond reasonable doubt, specific enough to identify those responsible. As news of the conspiracy spread across independent networks, reactions varied. Some Alliance members expressed outrage and demanded investigations. Others dismissed the evidence as human propaganda, a ploy to destabilize the established order. Corporate interests, particularly those competing with Xenoforge, seized on the scandal for their own purposes, further muddying the waters of public discourse. Through it all, Zara found herself increasingly drawn to Wyatt's quiet competence, his unwavering dedication to exposing the truth, despite the personal risk. He was an enigma that her scientific mind longed to unravel, a human whose capabilities challenged her understanding of evolutionary biology, whose actions defied her preconceptions about his species. One evening, as they monitored the spreading ripples of their revelation, she finally asked the question that had been forming since that first day in the processing chamber. Why did you agree to dismember the razor claw for them? If you already suspected Xenoforge's true agenda, why participate in their research at all? Wyatt was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he moved to a storage compartment and retrieved a bottle containing an amber liquid whiskey, a human intoxicant, that Zara recognized but had never sampled. He poured a small amount into 2 glasses, offering one to her. I wanted to know what they knew, he said, finally taking a seat across from her. About humans, about Wellborns, about their plans. Getting inside their operation was the only way to confirm my suspicions. He took a sip of the whiskey, his eyes distant. And I needed them to see what they were dealing with. To understand that their weapons and cybernetics and genetic engineering still couldn't match what natural evolution had already produced. A demonstration, Zara said, understanding dawning. You weren't just following orders or earning a payment. You were sending a message. To Xenoforge, to the Alliance, to anyone watching who thought humans could be easily controlled or eliminated. He raised his glass in a small salute. And to you, Dr. Kale, the scientist they sent to evaluate the threat I represent. Zara took a tentative sip of the whiskey, the unfamiliar liquid burning pleasantly as it traced its way down her throat. And what threat is that exactly? For the first time since she had met him, Wyatt Cross smiled a genuine expression that transformed his features, softening the hard edges and bringing warmth to his eyes. The threat of humanity's potential. The possibility that we might become something more than what others have planned for us. The unpredictability of natural evolution in a species that adapts faster than anyone expected. It was a profound thought, one that resonated with Zara's understanding of evolutionary biology. Throughout her career, she had studied species that had reached evolutionary equilibrium, perfectly adapted to their ecological niches, stable over millions of years. Humanity, by contrast, was still in flux, still becoming their potential, as yet unrealized. What happens now? She asked, gesturing toward the communications terminal, where reports of the conspiracy continued to accumulate. Wyatt's expression grew serious once more. Now we prepare for the backlash. Xenoforge won't go down without a fight, and those elements within the Alliance who supported Project Prometheus will try to discredit us, eliminate the evidence. Eliminate us, if they can. You think they'll come after us directly? I know they will. His certainty was chilling. We've exposed too much, threatened too many powerful interests. This station is secure for now, but we can't stay here indefinitely. As if in response to his words, a priority alert chimed from the communications terminal. The screen displayed a message from one of their contacts within the independent news networks. Alliance Council called emergency session. Vote of no confidence in leadership. Investigation into Xenoforge ties launched. Warrant issued for Richter's arrest. A second message followed immediately. Be advised, counterclaim circulating. Xenari scientist accused of treason. Human mercenary of sabotage and murder. Both designated high-priority fugitives. That was fast, Wyatt observed, though he didn't seem particularly surprised. They're trying to control the narrative, paint us as the villains, before the evidence becomes too widely accepted. Zara felt a momentary pang of loss. Her career, her standing in the Alliance, her entire professional identity, all sacrificed in the name of truth. Yet somehow the regret she expected didn't materialize. Instead, she felt a curious lightness, as if she had shed a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. So we're fugitives now, she said, testing how the word felt. Wanted criminals. Heroes or villains, depending on who you ask. Wyatt refilled their glasses. Welcome to the complicated moral universe of those who challenge power, Dr. Kale. Zara, she corrected him. If we're going to be fugitives together, you might as well use my given name. Another smile, briefer but no less genuine. Wyatt, then. They raised their glasses in a silent toast to truth, to resistance to the uncertain future they now face together. Outside the viewport, the endless dance of ships continued against the backdrop of stars, each one carrying beings with their own stories, their own moral compromises, their own journeys toward truth or power or simple survival. And among them, a Zanari scientist and a human warrior, unlikely allies in a struggle that had only just begun. 3 months later, Zara stood before the newly formed Interspecies Ethics Commission, a body created in the wake of the Xenoforge scandal, to investigate violations of sentient rights across multiple jurisdictions. The chamber was packed with representatives from dozens of worlds, including for the first time a significant delegation from Earth and its colonies. "The evidence is conclusive," she stated, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. Project Prometheus represented a deliberate attempt to hamper the natural evolutionary development of a sentient species through targeted biological warfare. It violated not only Alliance law, but the fundamental ethical principles upon which interstellar cooperation is based. On the display behind her, images from the Remora 4 facility played in a silent loop, the containment units, the modified creatures, the experimental data. Evidence that could not be denied or dismissed, no matter how powerful the interests aligned against it. Moreover, she continued, the involvement of certain Alliance officials raises serious questions about institutional safeguards against such ethical breaches. When those tasked with protecting sentient rights become complicit in their violation, the system itself must be re-evaluated. The Commission members listened in silence, their expressions ranging from horror to skepticism to carefully maintained neutrality. In the months since the initial revelations, political realignments had spread through the Alliance like shockwaves, old alliances fracturing and new ones forming as various factions sought to distance themselves from the scandal or capitalize on the resulting chaos. Xenoforge itself had collapsed under the weight of coordinated sanctions, its assets seized, and its leadership, those who hadn't managed to flee to non-extradition territories, facing criminal charges. Colonel Richter remained at large, though rumors placed him in the lawless regions beyond the border worlds, gathering mercenaries and former corporate security personnel for some unknown purpose. As for Wyatt Cross, he sat now among the Earth delegation, his presence a silent reminder of humanity's stake in these proceedings. In the months since Remora the Ford, he had emerged as an unexpected diplomat, leveraging his unique status to bridge the gap between traditional human governance and the well-born communities that had previously existed on the margins of colonial society. When Zara concluded her testimony, the commission chair, a venerable Talaxian, whose skin pulsed with thoughtful blue patterns, addressed the assembly. Dr. Kale's evidence, combined with the findings of our independent investigators, leaves little room for doubt. Project Prometheus represented a grave violation of our most sacred principles. The question before us now is not one of facts but of response. How do we ensure such atrocities are never again committed in the name of security or progress? The debate that followed was passionate, sometimes heated, as representatives from across the galaxy grappled with implications that extended far beyond a single conspiracy. At its core lay questions of power, of fear, of the right of species to determine their own evolutionary destiny. When the formal session concluded, Zara found Wyatt waiting for her in a quiet alcove overlooking the Commission's central courtyard. The light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the carefully tended alien flora, creating a moment of tranquil beauty amidst the political turbulence. "You did well in there," he said by way of greeting. They listened. Really listened, not just politically. "Some of them," she acknowledged. "Others are already calculating how to turn this to their advantage. Power structures don't change overnight, even in the face of irrefutable evidence." "No, but they do change." He gestured toward a group of delegates crossing the courtyard below, a mix of species engaged in animated conversation, including several humans, whose bearing marked them as wellborns. 3 months ago, that meeting wouldn't have happened. Today, they're discussing joint research initiatives into adaptive genetics, with ethical oversight from multiple species. It was true. For all the political maneuvering and resistance from entrenched interests, real change was occurring. The scandal had forced a long overdue conversation about species rights, about the limits of intervention, about the future of a galactic community that included rapidly evolving members alongside those who had reached relative stability. "What happens now?" Zara asked, echoing the question she had posed months ago aboard the Crossroads station. Wyatt considered for a moment before answering. "The Commission will establish new protocols. Independent oversight committees will be formed. Some of those responsible will face consequences. Others will escape justice. Life will continue. And us." The question slipped out before she could consider its implications, the ambiguity of that simple pronoun hanging in the air between them. A smile touched his features, that rare, genuine expression that still caught her by surprise whenever it appeared. "I've been invited to lead a joint research team, humans, working alongside Alliance scientists, to study evolutionary adaptation across species in a controlled but ethical framework. They need a xenobiologist to head the scientific side of things." "Are you offering me a job, Cross?" Zara asked, unable to keep the amusement from her voice. "I'm offering you a partnership." His eyes held hers, conveying a depth of meaning beyond the simple words. Science and strength, working together toward a future where evolution isn't feared but understood, where potential is nurtured rather than suppressed. Outside the viewport, the sun slipped below the horizon, leaving the courtyard in twilight, illuminated by bioluminescent plants from a dozen worlds. Inside, Zara felt a sense of possibility open before her, a new chapter in her scientific journey, one not constrained by the narrow interests of institutions, but guided by the pursuit of truth, wherever it might lead. "Partners, then," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting custom that once had seemed so foreign, but now felt natural. Wyatt took her hand, his grip firm, but careful, mindful of his strength, even in this simple gesture. "To the future, Dr. Kale, whatever it may hold." As they stood together, watching darkness fall, and the stars emerge above the Commission complex, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From that first moment in the processing chamber, where she had watched a human tear apart an apex predator, as if it were nothing to this quiet moment of new beginning. The galaxy was changing. Power was shifting. Old fears were being confronted and perhaps overcome. And she, a Zanari scientist, who had once been tasked with assessing the threat posed by human potential, now found herself advocating for that same potential to be embraced rather than feared. Life, like evolution itself, moved in unexpected directions. The key was to adapt, to grow, to face each new challenge with both scientific curiosity and moral clarity. And to recognize, as she had learned from Wyatt Cross, that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe was not strength or speed or adaptive ability, but the courage to stand for truth when power aligned against it. Together, they turned away from the viewport and walked toward the future that awaited them. A future neither could have imagined when their paths first crossed, but one they now approached as partners in the greatest scientific endeavor of all, understanding what we might become and ensuring that the journey honors the best of what we already are.